I'm Bill Mesce. I teach here at Kean University. I also write. I've written for the screen, I've written for the page, and I've written for the stage. That at this point it gets harder and harder to remember it. We were kind of economically towards the lower end of middle class. I did most of my growing up in Newark, which back then, believe it or not, was a lot of fun. Nobody had to worry about you being on the streets at night. As a matter of fact, they seemed to prefer you were on the streets at night, then they didn't have to deal with you at home. But that was actually where I got my movie habit, was at Newark, because in those days they still had neighborhood movie theaters. And every weekend, especially in the summer, Saturday and Sunday both, to get me out of her hair, my mother would give me $1 to get lost. And the whole bunch of us from the block, whose mothers apparently were saying the same thing, we would all troop down together to the Elwood Theater, which was just about 2 blocks away, 3 blocks away. And in those days, for that $1, you got your ticket, you got some sort of horrific candy or ice cream, something bad for you, and a nice big sugary soda. And you had enough left over that on your way home, you stopped by Bernie's Confectionery to get a comic book. And I saw everything. In those days, the movie usually changed every week. You didn't know what was coming because movies were released in a much different pattern in those days. But that's where I got the habit. Well, I got my undergrad degree at the University of South Carolina because that was the only school that took me that I could afford at the time. I was just working my way down the coast. I really didn't know anything about them. But that was where I got interested in film and in writing, and it actually turned out to be a great experience. Then in the 90s, I went for a master's in communication at Montclair State. And then just a couple of years ago, to try to better qualify myself for full-time teaching, I went back for an MFA at Fairleigh Dickinson University. It was a really nice low residency program, which if you're working and paying bills and have family, it's really the way to go, because there's no way you can do full-time. I'd actually been trying to go for my PhD, but I cannot swing the time or the money. It's just too much at this point. Well, the one that eats up the most time was I was at HBO for 27 years. And I got hired as a secretary, back when they still called them secretaries, because they misscored my typing test. And I was there a couple of years, and somebody in the company who was kind of new to the company gave me a break. I came up and I did 6 years as a corporate writer for them, and then after that I became a manager in one of their departments. Before that I was in publishing for a couple of years, which was actually a good education for when I started getting published. I knew what I was going to be in for. I'll be damned if I know. I really don't. I guess I was in junior high or high school, but it wasn't anything serious until I got to college. And then it was more out of my interest in film. I took a film appreciation class. I had been a buff, but I hadn't seriously studied it. And I had a great professor named Bernie Dunlap. And Bernie was just phenomenal. He's one of those professors that you see in the movies that changes students' lives. And Bernie got me all lit up about film, and for a while there I said, I want to make movies. That's what I want to do. And I very quickly realized I had no technical aptitude at all, but I could write. So then I started taking a couple of writing courses. I happened to be lucky enough to take another great teacher, a guy named William Price Fox, who was primarily a prose writer, but he had written for Hollywood for a couple of years. So the school had hired him to do both. So I took a prose course under him, and I took a screenwriting course under him. And my intent at the time, because I was better at screenwriting than I was at prose, was that, not realizing how nearly impossible it is to get work, I will become a successful screenwriter and then piggyback doing some prose writing on the tail end. And it actually worked out the other way around. But that's when I got serious, and I started making student films when I was in college. All of which, thank God, have disappeared because they were pretty abominable. But that was the first couple steps. Back in the 90s, I went back for a master's at Montclair State. I was working at HBO and I was bored. And the company was going to pay for it. So I went back to school. And the semester after I graduated, somebody from the program remembered me and said, "How would you like to teach a class?" And I thought this would be a nice way to pick up a few extra dollars. Let me see what this teaching thing is about. And I fell in love with it. After that, I kept trying to get back in there. I couldn't get another adjunct job. And I kind of like pushed it on the back burner. I would do guest lectures on behalf of the company, but I couldn't get a semester-long gig. Then after I lost my job at HBO, it was my wife said, "You know, you always wanted to teach. This is the time." So then I started putting out applications to be an adjunct. And as soon as I got my first gigs, everything I had loved about it the first time came back. It's not like you always like it, and it's not like you always like your students. But by and large, it's probably the most gratifying thing I've done. And I'll even throw writing in there. After 2 rounds of therapy, I realized I got a real love-hate thing with writing going on. But teaching is, I love teaching. Don't always like students, but I love teaching. It is definitely the teacher-student interaction. I have been offered online courses. I won't teach them because to me, what's the point? If you're not in the room with them and getting to work spontaneously where things come up, things come out of the ether, somebody has a question. That's why I do it. That's my favorite part. That, and when at the end of the class, at the end of a semester, if even a couple of them have gotten something, you really feel like you did something. I'm not a literary writer. I don't write literature. I am not an artist. I'm a storyteller. I'm an entertainer. My stuff disappears. That goes with it. I mean, you accept that. You're going to write something, people will read it, hopefully they'll enjoy it. You might get some nice reviews out of it, but 6 months or a year later, it's like it never happened. Teaching, if you did your job and if it worked, somebody walks out of that room carrying something with them for years, if not for the rest of their life. There's nothing I'm ever going to write in fiction that'll ever do that. Even though I haven't been able to get a full-time gig and I have to teach as an adjunct, I still keep coming back because nothing else does that. The thing you get from teaching that you don't get from writing is the immediate feedback. You can see if it's working. You can see if a class or a session is clicking. You can tell when you've lost a student, and you can tell when you've get one. I think it's similar to people who act for the stage, that immediate response. And once it does start to click, my experience will be that a day will snowball. If it starts off good, it gets better. If the students start getting involved, it gets even better. I've taught classes that went so well, I almost didn't have to be there. Flip side is I've taught classes where you're counting the minutes, but when it works, there's nothing like it. Writing, with the exception of writing for the stage and sitting in the audience, you have no way of knowing how it plays. You may see reviews, but you don't get any kind of immediate feedback. You don't see anybody's face. So you're kind of writing into the dark, hoping that enough people buy this thing that you'll get another shot at it. But you really don't see what the feedback is. I have occasionally, I mean on rare occasions, gotten letters from somebody who's read something I wrote. And that's nice, because it's the only time you really hear from somebody that you connected, that you did what you set out to do. Otherwise, you really don't know. And especially if you're writing for film, since the way it ends up usually doesn't look anything like what you had in your mind. The reaction is almost academic, and you're going, oh, well, you know, they liked it, but that really wasn't what I wrote, or they hated it, doesn't matter, that's not the way I wrote it. Well, on the fiction side, there was a trilogy set in World War II. The first one was The Advocate, then came Officer of the Court. Then Bantam and I got in a fight, and their version came out as The Defender. 12, 13 years later, I finally got to publish my version of that third one, and that was called A Cold and Distant Place. And then I have this one coming up in the summer called Legacy, which is a bit different for me because it's, I've never really written anything that's drama-driven. They've tended to be some kind of suspense or thriller or something like that, melodrama. This one's pretty much a straight drama about a forensic psychologist. On the nonfiction side, I've done a lot of writing about film. I did a history of HBO. The good thing about not being a commercial success is nobody says, you shouldn't write that, it's bad for your career. I don't have a career. I have, oh God, somebody will publish this, I should write this. I think my score is 18, which isn't bad for somebody who's kind of been a commercial flop, but I've always been able, especially on the nonfiction side, to write what's interested me. I'd always wanted to do a history at HBO. I have 2 collections of essays about the movies, and they were just topics that, I think this is interesting. Oh, I've always wondered about this. So it's been fun. I wish it had been more lucrative, because I don't think I've earned enough to take the family on a weekend to the shore with most of them. But on the other hand, you look at them sitting there, this is gonna sound really vain, but you look at them sitting on a bookshelf, and you go, that's not too bad. Well, Blowout, which I didn't get a screen credit for, I think it wound up being called The Versace Murder, which I took my name off of. I got hired by a friend of mine to adapt his book. It was something called Photographing Fairies. And that did find a home, and the minute I found a home, I got bounced. So even though the movie got made, there's nothing of mine in it. And there was a TV movie where I had a ghost for Nicholas Pileggi, the guy who wrote Goodfellas. He was the writer that was getting the movie made, and Nick wound up in the hospital. But they needed a screenplay to keep the project alive. So I get a call, we need you to be Nick. So I had to write a screenplay as he would write it, and I was getting feedback from him, and I was also getting guidance from all of the other development people to keep the project alive. And it did stay alive, and eventually it did get made. Although I don't know what happened in the 2 or 3 years between the time I worked on it and the time it actually came out, but man, that thing was a mess. So there was a point there where I was mad that I wasn't going to get a screen credit because I was actually being kind of a ghostwriter, and then I saw the movie and I was like, I'm good with it. I'm okay that my name's not on that. The only thing I was on that my name is actually on is a small little thriller called Road Ends. Not a great movie, but not a bad little B thriller. I was happy with it. It was one of those things where I go, if that's the only thing my name is on, I mean, it's not like anybody's gonna miss me when I'm gone, but I could live with that being the one that my name is on. There's one lesson that applies to both of them, and that there are no rules. When you first start teaching, and every time you teach at a school, there'll be a session, like an orientation kind of thing, and people will give you your helpful hints. And it's just like when you pick up those how to write a screenplay books, how to write a novel books. They're not bad, those are all useful tools. But once you do this for any length of time, whether it's writing, in any kind of writing, or whether it's teaching, you realize that each class and each group of students is different. A couple of years ago, I was teaching 2 sections of business writing here at Kean. One was in the morning and one was in the afternoon. Demographically the same, size the same, working from the same syllabus. And that morning class, and it wasn't early morning either, it was like 10 o'clock or so, was like pulling teeth. The afternoon class, that was one of those classes that practically ran itself. I almost didn't have to do anything. Everybody was so engaged, it kind of ran itself. Same school, same campus, same student body. If you looked at class pictures of the 2 groups, they wouldn't have looked any different from each other. Why? Although somebody else I taught once, she had a theory. She said, when did you say you were teaching them? I said, one's at 10 o'clock and the other one was, I think, at like 12:30, 1 o'clock. Afternoon class, they ate. Morning class, they're hungry. Blood sugar crash. I don't know if it's ever that simple, but again, it goes to my point that you have to think on your feet. Everything is different. I've never written any 2 screenplays the same way simply because the people who've hired me have been completely different. What they've wanted has been completely different. Their different crazinesses have been different. If you think that there's some sort of template or formula that gets you through this, you're asking for trouble. That's like saying, I want to be an NFL quarterback, go to the Super Bowl, just show me the book that says what I have to do. It doesn't work that way. I really hate failing people. Although it's easier to live with when I think I have a student that's worked so hard to fail. But the most painful memory I have is when I was teaching at Hudson County. It was a community college, open admissions. About 90 to 95% of my students were Hispanic, They were either immigrants or the children of immigrants. A lot of them were coming from dysfunctional homes, low-income homes, bad primary education system. Every liability you can think of, every urban handicap you can think of, they had. And those kids busted their hump. They worked hard. They knew that for people coming where they came from, this was their only shot. And at the end of the semester, this was freshman comp. The way it works at Hudson County is the department, not the professor, the department gives them their final, gives them a prompt. They have to write an in-class essay, and the department grades it. And if they don't pass that final, no matter how they did the rest of the semester, they don't pass. But I was the one who had to tell them that they didn't pass. And I had to sit down with them each, one by one, and tell them if they made it or not. And with one exception, all the people who had missed, it was a 10-point scale. All the people who had missed by getting a 6. You had to have a 7. And it was just grueling. I mean, this was, because I was teaching 2 sections, it was 3 hours of this, one by one, having to sit down with them. Who starts crying, who gets all choked up, who just throws their hands up in frustration, goes, I did my best, this is as good as it's gonna get. I start crying, I start getting depressed. That was the most painful memories as a teacher. As a writer, I actually don't have a hell of a lot of good memories. Every painful memory is when something I wrote actually got made. I think my score is about 1 out of 5. I actually got to the screen. And the pain of it is sitting there going, man, this could have been so much better. And it wouldn't have taken much. There was one movie so bad, I had actually taken my name off. They wanted to put my name on, I had taken it off, because I knew it was going to stink. And before it came out, because of the subject matter, it was about the murder of Gianni Versace. They were actually getting some press about it. And I thought, I'm looking at the press attention it's getting, thinking, did I make a tactical error here pulling out of this thing? And then I saw a clip, just a clip. And I thought, oh my God, it's worse than I thought. And then they sent me this is back in the VHS days, they sent me a VHS of the movie. And I sat there watching this thing, and it was a car wreck. It starts off horrible, and then goes downhill from there. It almost looks like a Saturday Night Live skit of people making fun of bad movies. So they're making it even worse than bad movies are supposed to be. This was that bad. And the idea that it was going to be done in such a rush, I knew it was never going to be good, but I knew it didn't have to be that bad. And that was a little painful seeing that this shouldn't be this awful. You know, it could have been hold your nose awful instead of I gotta vomit awful. But you know, after a while, after you kick around for a while, your expectations that anything is ever gonna be any good, that bar gets lower and lower and lower. And you really do start thinking, well, if it's not completely awful, I'll call that a win. Yeah, don't do this. My wife used to taunt me when she was carrying our first child that because of what you do, you realize there's a 50-50 chance some child we have will want to do what you do. And when she said that to me, I said, any kid of mine who comes up to me and says, I want to be a writer, I'm going to beat every day with a buckle end of a belt until they say they want to be an accountant or a veterinarian or something. Because I just think it's a horrible, horrible, I can't even call it a profession. Because it drifts somewhere between being a profession and an avocation and an art. But it's so abusive. Rejection is the meal of the day. The fiscal rewards, unless you get to the real top of the pyramid, the fiscal rewards are feeble on a good day. And you do often ask yourself, is the pain in the ass that it almost always is worth the reward? And I have tried to walk away more than once. And I once told my therapist, it's like being a heroin junkie. You know it's bad for you. And you say, I'm gonna quit, and you do. And a couple of weeks go by, maybe even a couple of months, and then you start jonesing. Ooh, you know, I got an idea, or you get some idea worse, how to fix something that didn't work. And you say, okay, just one more time. That's it, I swear I'm just gonna do it this one last time, and that's all. And then you sit in the chair and you start working and you see stuff start to come together and you're back on it again. People who really, really want to write can't not write. I mean, that said, I do realize some people, there's a point where you burn out. that you simply can't take it anymore, and that you learn to live with not doing it. But until you get to that point, writers don't write because they want to write. They write because they can't not write. And I don't ever want to see a kid of mine go through that. Get a good job, become a tax preparer. Constantly. When I first started getting published, I started getting published about 20 years after I got my first screenwriting job. And I burned out and I walked away from a contract with a major publishing house that liked my work. And I still, part of me kicks myself about that, because I know I'm never going to get that opportunity again. But I also know if I had stayed, I would have gone insane. So it's mixed. I mean, now that I have, my kids are college age, I keep thinking, well, if I had stayed, that would really be a big help on tuition. But then I also think if I had stayed, it wouldn't be going to tuition, it'd be going to therapy. Because by the time I left, I had done 3 books for Bantam. I really was in bad shape. On the screenwriting thing, I mean, there's things I feel bad about, but I don't regret. I mean, I feel bad I didn't get the break. There's a director, I mean, he's gone now, named Robert Aldrich. And Robert Aldrich, some of his famous movies, The Dirty Dozen, Flight of the Phoenix, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, those are his biggies. He had a nice long career, a lot of ups and downs. And I remember reading an interview with him, and he said, in this business, if you had to choose between talent and luck, you gotta go with luck. Luck is what brings the opportunities to you. Nobody goes out in that business hunting for talent. Things kind of fall your way. My first professional screenwriting job, I won a writing contest, and that got me a gig with Brian De Palma. How does that happen? The first 2 gigs after that were also for substantial players, but none of those happened. I did the work, couldn't find a home for the projects died. That was kind of my quotient of luck. I would wind up doing like another 20 screenplays professionally, but they'd all be for further and further and further down the ladder. I mean, at a certain point, I was really just writing for money. Somebody would offer you a job, how much does it pay? How long is this gonna take? Okay, that's why I did the Versace thing, and that paid for most of my wedding. There's a lot of things I'm sad didn't happen, but I can't think of anything I did that I regret, as opposed to leaving Bantam, which is something, should you have done that? Was that really the smartest thing you could have done? Probably not. When I first sit down, not to overthink it. I tell anybody else who wants to write, don't pay attention to how I do it. That's how my head works. It works fine for me. I don't sit down unless I have a pretty good idea that I can pretty much see the story. Other people I know will sit down with just the ghost of an idea and start churning out pages, and they'll find it in the writing. Other people I know have to do a lot of prep. That they'll write a Bible for the book, and they start doing little character notes. I've seen people do the index card thing, where they have index cards on a bulletin board and they're playing around with the order of scenes to try to figure out an arc for the thing. Mine, a lot of work will happen in my head, and it may sit in there sometimes for years until I finally see it, and then I go, oh, okay, now I see it. Now, it doesn't mean that it's all there, because the way your brain typically works is when you think you have the whole story, you really don't. What you have are the greatest hits. You have the peak moments. And I used to worry about that, because I sit down to write and say, geez, I thought I had it all in my head. And then you keep hitting these walls. Well, you haven't hit the walls. You've just hit the boring parts, which you have to rely on craft rather than inspiration to stitch those peak moments by. So anything I tell anybody is, this is what I do, but I'm not you. And it also took me years to get to do it this way. I don't write now the way I used to write. When I was younger, it was harder, and I would do more beforehand, before I sat down. I don't do that much. I have found, and I'm not trying to flatter myself, but I've found I can actually hold a fair amount of material in my head. And it's not because I'm a genius, it's out of necessity. I'll teach 4, 5, 6 classes a semester. I have a family, I got a house, I got a dog, I got bills to pay. I don't have a lot of time to fart around with something. Most of the time I have to actually dwell on something will be in the car or walking the dog. I have to get a lot of work done in my head, so that those moments when I can actually sit at the keyboard, I'm not playing around, I can actually bang stuff out. So I've done my first draft, I've done my second draft, I've tweaked with stuff in my head, And when I sit down, that's pretty much how it's going to go. I have a novel coming out this summer. Now, granted, I was working from what had started as a screenplay, but there was really only ever one draft, and that's getting published. And I was able to tweak it as I went. Oh, that's not quite right. Oh, because I knew where it had to go. But the story arc was already there in my head. I knew how the character arcs were going to go, so that I only ever made one pass. And that was a habit I got into when I first started getting published by Bantam. They had me on deadlines. I didn't have a time to rough something out. To make my deadlines, I had to try to get it right the first time, which I do not advise anybody. If I can do it, it's because I've been doing this for a long time now. I got my first professional writing job, which was a screenwriting job in 1979. That's a long time. You do learn efficiencies as you go along. If somebody was starting, I would definitely say, don't do it my way. Give yourself 30 years and you might be able to do it this way. Right now, you got to do the hard stuff. In terms of craft, let's never underestimate the value of craft. A lot of people who get into this, their image of the writer is this person under the control of their muse. That there's this fiery blood pulsing through their veins that's going to pour out onto the page. And in a lot of first drafts it does. And usually first drafts, in my opinion, first draft is the draft you know you're going to throw away. After that is when the work gets hard. And that's where I think you see where the people who are there for fun separate from the people who are there because they think there's something they need to accomplish. Because the craft part, which is what makes the art part work, that's tedious, it's boring, and it requires a great deal of self-education. One of the things I loved about the program at Fairleigh Dickinson, and it was something that was kind of percolating in my own head, is that you cannot teach anybody how to write. You can teach them how to learn how to write, and that's mostly by looking at how different writers do different things. You really do self-educate yourself in the way that words work. And the way that different writers can manipulate words. I mean, when you read Hemingway, first of all, you know it's Hemingway. And he's entirely different from Faulkner. But they also accomplish two different things. Most of my young students don't study writing. They don't read a whole hell. Even in my creative writing classes, it still amazes me how little reading a lot of my students do. But that is how you learn how to write. I often compare it to the way we learn how to talk. Nobody teaches us to talk. Your mother sitting you on her lap going, say mama, it doesn't teach you anything. We pick it up, we acquire it, we absorb it from being around talking adults. And bit by bit, we learn syntax and grammar and verbal punctuation. We learn all that stuff simply by absorption. Writing is no different. You read a lot of different stuff. You read the kind of stuff that isn't even necessarily fun for you to read, but you think it might be interesting in what you will learn. My first novel went through something like 10 full drafts, and I don't know how many partials. And I could not figure out how to make it turn the corner, how to make it work. And then I read a book by John le Carré called The Russia House, and it was an epiphany. It's kind of complicated, but when I saw what he did in that book, structurally, how he told the story, I went, that's it. That's what I need to do. I'm not talking about plagiarizing. When I tell students, yeah, we all steal. We're not lifting their language, we're not lifting their stories, we're not lifting things like that. We're lifting things like a certain structure or a certain approach or a certain way with language, a certain flavor to the writing. Oh, that's what I need. And that was simply from reading constantly. And I stumbled across him. He'd been an author I'd always been interested in reading, had never gotten around to it. Finally read this book and go, oh yes, that, voila. If you don't diligently do that, if you don't make yourself do that, you are very early gonna hit walls in your writing. I'm not being artsy-fartsy about it. There is a skill set that you can acquire, that you can learn, but nobody's going to hand it to you. You have to invest that time. And then there's the discipline of actually sitting down to do it. But I've known a number of writers who have a problem actually sitting down, and it's for a variety of reasons. Some, I think, are afraid it won't come out as good as it is in their head, and it won't. You live with that, you accept that. I've done this enough times to know the book that you woke up out of a dream state with, oh, this is gonna be great, is never the book that you get on the page. Some are better at conceiving than they are at writing. Some are lazy. There's always a really good excuse, a valid, perfectly legitimate excuse not to sit in that chair. The difference is who gives into it. I'm being honest. I got stuff to do. All right, fine. You go do that stuff. It doesn't get written. I've got stuff to do. But I got to at least spend 10 minutes in this chair. I got to at least get out a page. That's what gets it done. It's like going to the gym. I don't know anybody except over bulked up gym rats who likes going to the gym any more than I know that many people who like to eat right. You don't eat right because broccoli tastes great. You eat right because you don't want to die at 60. Same reason you go to the gym, same reason you want to sit your ass in that chair is because you know otherwise it doesn't get done. As I said, the chair is where you tell who's in this for real and it's a hobby. If it's something that gives you pleasure, if you enjoy doing it, if it's a lot of fun, God bless you. If you want anything more out of that, then again, it's like going to the gym. If you haven't worked up a sweat, you didn't get a workout. If you think it's always going to be fun when you sit in that chair, then you shouldn't be doing this because it won't take long if you're doing it for real where it's going to stop being fun. The fun comes when it's done and you look at it and you say, I have written a book, and that you can come back to it, usually sometime much later, because if you read it right then, you're going to go, oh my God, I really screwed this up. But when you come back to it later and you say, well, okay, I got about 60, 70% of what I was after. I look back at those books I did for Bantam, and they are so long ago now that I cannot remember writing that stuff. It's like it was somebody else. And I'll read those things going, where the hell did you pull that out of? That's not you. Wherever my head was at when I was doing those, I can never get back there. And it's not like they're flawless either. It's still, I will read them and go, ooh, you know, that one got by you. But I can look at them and go, by and large, I did what I was supposed to do. That's the fun part. And then, and this goes back to sounding vain, if you see a couple of those on the shelf, you go, okay, I don't have to be embarrassed or self-conscious or flinch when somebody says, are you a writer? And go, yes. Although I still get a little, yeah. It still doesn't wear well on me, but I can feel it. Well, teaching, yeah, I'd love to have a full-time job. All I can do is keep sending out the applications. On the writing side, I have this odd apprehension that I may be coming to the end because almost everything that I've wanted to write, I've written and gotten published. And there's not a lot left. I keep reminding myself that I've written stuff that I had never planned to write, that things had come up, so things may come up. But I really only have a couple of things that I left that I want to do that are mine. After that, I don't know. When it comes to writing, I've never thought long term. Well, where do you want to be in 10 years? Well, Jesus, if I could still get something in ink, I'm doing good. The idea that there's some sort of end game to this, I'm writing better than I was writing 20, 30 years ago, both stylistically and in terms of content. I'd like to think that will keep happening, which makes me interested. What would something I write 5, 10 years from now be like? But other than that, I'm not looking for anything specific other than I said, try to get the next thing published. Become a veterinarian, become a tax preparer, become an accountant, don't become an MBA, and don't go into politics. Actually, seriously, as a practical word of advice, because so few people actually make money at this, or make good money, and I learned this in publishing, most professional writers don't make a living purely off their writing, is to find another job you like that will essentially subsidize your writing. A lot of writers teach. A lot of writers have a spouse who keeps them fed or her fed. But as I said, the number of people who don't have to do anything but write and can live a reasonable life at it is actually a very small number of people. Most of them do something else. It would be nice if it was something that you like to do. There were quite a few years there where I really enjoyed what I was doing at HBO. Eventually, it came out that I'd been there too long, but there was a period there where I go, I have a day job I like, and it pays me well, and I don't need to live or die by whether something that gets published of mine makes money. So if you can get your yin and get your yang and stick them in the same circle, you're doing good. My favorite temp job, I didn't know guys did this. He worked for General Electric, in the light bulb division. And his job was to drive around to places like Walmart or Target, places like that, and set up the GE light bulb display. And me and this other kid, who was also a temp, we were carrying the shelving. But it was a great job. You'd drive around, you'd go in the store, you'd be there for a couple of hours, go out and have lunch, take another nice drive to another store, set up light bulbs. And what I couldn't get over, I mean, we were temps, me and this other kid, but this was this guy's job. This is what he did. Man, I didn't get jobs like that. My other great memory of my temp days was working as a morgue clerk in a geriatric hospital. And I had heard I was being assigned as a clerk typist. Nobody told me it was for the hospital morgue. And when they told me part of the morgue clerk's responsibilities are to help with the autopsies, excuse me, I have to make a call. And I called up my agency. I'm in a morgue. I thought you were filling in for, yes, the clerk works in a morgue. So are you saying you want, get me out? But you got to give us a couple of days to find. Okay, fine. You got 2 days to get a replacement for me. But I want you to get on the phone with these people and say that if somebody in this hospital drops dead, and it's all old people, somebody's going to die this week, I'm not going in that room. So that was a long 48 hours. I did get to clean specimen bottles, and they had specimens of everything.